It marks the start of the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. It's a crucial moment for the country to confront the crisis of gender-based violence and femicide. Now, this year's campaign begins after President Cyril Ramaphosa is said to have declared GBV a national crisis following nationwide shutdown protests that happened last week. Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Sindisiwe Chikunga, is launching the 2025 campaign in Gauteng today. She's joining us now ahead of that. Minister, thank you so much for the time. Perhaps we can start off with some clarification, because I think we're all a little bit not understanding fully the situation at hand with regards to the declaration of a national disaster, national crisis, classification as well being one of the words. So has it been classified or declared a national crisis or a national disaster? Which one of the two is it?
It has been classified as a crisis, as the president announced last week at the social summit. So that is exactly what has happened. What this actually means is that gender-based violence is being elevated to the highest level of government priorities. It means that the president itself, but cabinet must now be involved. But it also means that we have to involve other levels of government. Like, for instance, yesterday, there was already a meeting of intergovernmental structures that will include your national, your province as well, premier's offices as well as local government mayors and other leadership. So that actually gives us that itch for us to move now to ensure that we prioritize this, to relook at budgets that we have, and if we can then move some of the funds towards dealing with the scourge.
Okay, I'm going to perhaps take it and just ensure that I have this correct. So it's been classified as a national crisis, according to what the president has put forward. What do we then make of even the comments made by the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Nkosini Hlabisa, who in his statement actually welcomed the decision to classify gender-based violence and femicide as a national disaster? At the same time, the National Disaster Management Centre's Dr. Bongani Sithole saying that GBVF now meets the threshold of a potential disaster as defined in the Act. And the only reason I want to make note of this and really find clarity is because messaging determines legislation in this regard.
I think the issue with Department of COGTA, and definitely I wouldn't want to speak for them. However, it's about whether you can have a crisis classified or not. And I think that is what they're actually trying to look at. But otherwise, if we take what the president himself said, he said it is being classified as a crisis. And that is what we think we are doing. And of course, the interventions that are already being implemented, they talk to elevating the scourge to the level of the presidency, to the level of cabinet, to the level of other spheres of government. And that is what I would think would have actually happened even if it had been classified as a disaster, because it would actually mean that we can now rechannel our resources towards that. And I think that is exactly what we are doing.
Yeah, so I was going to find out whether there's a difference in it being classified a crisis and a disaster. What does it actually change legislatively? I know you're talking about a relooking of budgets as well, being a key proponent to that. But the COGTA minister speaks of, for example, the Interministerial Committee on GBVF being a key initiative here. It doesn't invoke emergency powers if we're doing this. And then there's also the reform of the criminal justice system, which could be put in place. Do all those things still apply?
Definitely, it is applying. The IMC is there. We've looked even yesterday at the structures that already exist. The IMC is there. But of course, you've got that big a meeting that sits to communicate what should happen. And I think the process will be that we're going to have the technical committee that will then report to the IMC and then to the bigger meeting and then to cabinet to say these are the actions that we intend taking out of the classification of gender-based violence as a crisis, as the president announced. So indeed, I think what is happening now is exactly what would have happened, whether it is classified, unless, of course, you declare it as a disaster, probably then the actions would probably mean something else. But the classification itself, whether as a disaster or as a crisis, would actually mean exactly what we are doing right now. However, the president classified it as a crisis, and that is why we are dealing with that.
Why did we need
implementing that?
Why did we need any kind of classification or declaration to consider it significant and important and to prioritize it, considering that we already know the statistics, we already know how horrible a scourge it really has left on South Africa and marked when it comes to women, children and persons with disabilities as well? Should we not have already been doing this?
In fact, there are things that you cannot do. For instance, if you have said in your annual performance plan, this is what I'm going to do this year, you have got to stick to that. However, with the classification of gender-based violence and femicide, it actually means you can reprioritize it. And that gives you those powers as either departments of government or even ministers or mayors, etc. It gives you those powers. And that is why, therefore, the classification is important in enabling us to rechannel our resources and probably see whether we can actually take some of the resources from some other programs in order for us to deal with the scourge that is affecting women. So yes, indeed, we are aware of that. We have got legislations. A lot is being done on the ground. However, the scourge itself remains very high. And that is why the president saw the need of putting in place extraordinary measures by classifying it as a crisis.
Okay, so now with the start of the 16 days of activism against violence on women and children, does that mean that greater responsibility comes towards your office, towards national government as a whole, to now get it right when it comes to the sense of awareness, the ability to stop things from happening? And as we speak about the judicial system and how it puts forth its rulings when it comes to cases of GBVF?
Maybe let me start by saying the fight against gender-based violence and femicide is an everyday action and an everyday responsibility for us. However, during 16 days of activism, first as a member of United Nations, because we join other countries of the world, because this is a worldwide scourge. However, we join other countries, and then during this time, we elevate our actions, we focus everything on gender-based violence and femicide. But it doesn't mean that it only happens during 16 days of activism. It's an everyday fight that we are embarking on as government, as civil society, as academia, as communities, as traditional leadership, as religious leadership, because it takes all of us, but as men as well, as women, as children, and everybody. And that is why we have actually said one of our legacy projects from Women Empowerment Working Group of G20 is positive masculinity that we will be channeling to young boys. But we also look at other players that are important. For instance, our launch today will be with the film industry, with the media industry, with the recreation industry, to say, what is it that you can do in order to join us in the fight against this? How can you contribute towards sending out the message that says gender-based violence is wrong? Difficult to deal with it because our studies, our research findings and data, even at UN level, is indicating that the scourge of gender-based violence in the main happens between intimate partners, past and current. And therefore, it's something that happens in houses, in homes, and a little bit difficult to prevent from outside.
So is that not something then that maybe requires a little bit more with regards to just publication of data and information when it comes to transparency thereof? Would it not be a little bit more helpful if, in order to get this right, we we try and create monitors that help us understand how many cases have been prosecuted, for example, ring fencing those audited budget, the conviction rates, the case backlogs. Would that not help us in trying to understand? Because what you're seeing is a lot of people facing delays and even mistrust in the justice system.
In fact, the statistics and data is available. For instance, if you talk to prosecution or prosecutors, they will tell you that cases that get reported through to Thuthuzela centers, the conviction rate is above 75%. The magistrates will also give you their own statistics, and of course the police, they will give you, and the police, we know that they do release crime statistics. It may not be as disaggregated as we would wish it to be, but they do release statistics. So we do have some statistics and the picture of what is happening, whether there is backlog or not. Even with the DNA, for instance, we are aware of the fact that the police have actually tried to remove and to deal with that backlog. So we do have statistics in that regard. The issue is that it's about cases that get reported. There might be others that are not reported for many reasons. Families saying to them, don't report this because probably you are exposing somebody. So there might be other cases that do not get reported, and therefore we may not know about them. But those that get reported, those that go through to Thuthuzela centers, those families that go to our shelters, because we now have shelters, and we even have the statistics about those. For instance, from 55 to Thuthuzela centers, we are at 66 now. Before the end of the financial year, we're likely to have 2 more added to 68. We therefore are building these shelters. Our wish is that we did not have a reason to be building shelters because, in fact, to be building to Thuthuzela centers, because gender-based violence is committed by a person. And therefore, it means a person can decide not to do it. It takes a human being. It's not about dogs or lions committing this. It's persons and human beings, people that can stop doing it and therefore channel resources not on gender-based violence and femicide, but on other needs that are there. But for now, as long as it is so high, we have got therefore to channel resources to build those shelters and infrastructure, et cetera, so that we're able to accommodate, but also to have cases that are watertight and can stand the test of time in our courts.
Minister, I have 2 questions that I'd really like to get through as well, so hopefully we certainly can in the interest of time. Just your response to last week's Women for Change national shutdown that we saw. As a response to that, because the need there was for it to be declared a national disaster. Of course, not necessarily the case, with it being classified a national crisis instead. But what do we say to what we saw last week? How, as a country, do we respond to it to ensure that their fears are allayed?
We understand, and we understand exactly as to why women are crying. And it's not like sometimes as people think that we are not experiencing this. We have families. We probably have experienced gender-based violence in families. And therefore, we understand exactly what women are saying. And that is why the president responded to their cry and request by classifying it as a crisis. And for us, that is a positive response from the head of state, who himself, during the lockdown, during pandemic, said in South Africa, we have 2 pandemics, one that of COVID-19, and the second being gender-based violence and femicide. And probably in his speeches, never forgetting to refer to the issue of gender-based violence and femicide. So it's not like the president was just only responding to the shutdown. Of course, he had to, but also he himself, first as the head of state, but secondly, as a husband to a woman, a father to girls, and a grandfather maybe to grandchildren, sees this as a threat not only to other people, but even to his own family and to the people that are his own neighborhood. And therefore, his response for us is actually saying we do have a caring president who respond and who listens to people when they raise issues.
Yeah, one might say, well, why is it taken so long? And I suppose that could be the other caveat to all of this. Just very quickly, digital violence is a key theme this year when it comes to 16 days of activism. It is rising. You have cyberbullying, you have doxing to harassment in platform economies, etc. How exactly do we respond to something like that that is part of an international theme? And how do you raise awareness thereof?
In fact, it's one of the issues that we'll be discussing even today with the sectors, because we will have to look at the legislations, but also look at those channels that are responsible for social media, for instance, for digital media, for instance, to say how best do we hold them accountable for gender-based violence that happens in social media, etc., that sometimes harass women who report these cases, that actually to politicians, for instance, say to them, you can't continue to talk about this, or making people aware of gender-based violence and femicide. It's the issues that we're looking at, and correctly so, even at UN level or world level, and even at G20 level, this is the issue that we are paying attention to. Those that are responsible for this, they're also using social media for even human trafficking. We've seen this to the extent that we went to the House and delivered a ministerial statement alerting women to the abuse of social media, but also attracting them to work that does not exist, but ending up with human trafficking.
Yeah.
So indeed, we will also be looking at that, because even human trafficking, it does amount to gender-based violence, particularly if it is targeting women.
Yeah. Very important conversation, that last one. But I can always just say, Minister, that it's going to so much be about action and no longer just the words, because I think the pleasantries sound great, the wording sounds great, but without the action, I can see that a lot of South Africans feel dismayed, disheartened, and really angry as well. But I really appreciate your time this morning for having this conversation with us. Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Sindisiwe Chikunga. Appreciate